Average Podcast. I'm James.
And I'm Chris, and today we have a special guest, my dad.
Hi, I'm Nick.
All right, and today's topic is going to be fantasy football, kind of everything that goes into it and everything related to that aspect.
All right, so yeah, pretty much James and my dad pretty much play fantasy football pretty regularly. I'm not as huge into it as they are, so I'm pretty much just going to kind of ask the questions, get their feels for it, kind of what goes into fantasy football. All right, so just for starters, real quick, we're going to ask you, Dad, how long have you actually been playing fantasy football?
Well, I actually started kind of late in life, to be honest with you, compared to most people. This will be my 10th year of playing fantasy football this year.
10 years, jeez.
That's a long time.
What about you, James?
Let's see. I probably started when I was 15 or 16. I don't know. I hadn't really done too many leagues up until that point, and I don't know. I finally had a big enough group of friends that wanted to do one, and got started out, and definitely didn't go well the first time around.
So you've been playing around 6 years or so?
Yeah, I would say.
And you said your friends got you into it in
Yeah.
high school. What about you, Dad? What got you into it the first time then?
And that's what's kind of odd, considering how much I love playing fantasy football now, is that I really had no interest in playing fantasy football whatsoever. And I just had a friend who just would bug the crap out of me every year for about 4 or 5 straight years before I find it was like, okay, you know what, I'll try it one year and see how it works out.
Oh,
I didn't really believe that it would stick. I thought it would be a one-and-done type thing.
just to kind of get the friend off your back for a year.
Exactly.
And look at it now.
Right.
So then pretty much that's like, what drew you, James, to fantasy football in the first place then? Just the group of friends trying to get you into it, or was it something more than that?
It was something I was always interested in. Like, I always liked the idea of, drafting a team and then kind of progressing and seeing how you can, make trades or whatever the case might be to, make your team better.
Did you do that in like Madden's back in the day?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what drew me to it. Is I used to play Madden as a kid all the time, and doing those fantasy drafts or whatever throughout Madden kind of drew me to wanting to do a league. And then when I finally had enough friends that were really interested in actually, doing a league, I was all for it. Gave me the opportunity to, really get that same love I got from Madden, but with like actual live games.
Creating your own team aspect of it.
Absolutely.
And for you, Dad, it was just pretty much the coworker kept asking and you kind of gave in a little bit?
Exactly. I honestly thought it would just take up too much time. And
it's definitely time consuming.
He would swear that it would not take up hardly any time. He gave me the old 5 minutes a week to set your lineup thing, which, by the way, if you're going to play fantasy football and you're going to be good at it, you're going to spend a lot more than 5 minutes a week.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. I feel like when I did play fantasy football, I would fall into that. I mean, 5 minutes is kind of little, but I would not spend the time needed that I felt to be good at it when I did play it. So
yeah, you definitely have people in your league or just in general that'll like, oh, that person's not playing, I'll just switch them out, versus like spending the time to find players that are doing well in the waiver wire or, make the trades to make your team better. There's definitely people that won't put that kind of effort in and just kind of set a lineup, which, yeah, setting your lineup probably takes less than 5 minutes. But if you're just going on every week to set your lineup to make sure that players are supposed to be playing, you're probably not going to win.
All right. More goes into it than that.
Absolutely.
I think it was the league. The one guy like sets his lineup every Sunday when he goes on the toilet.
Oh yeah,
he talks about it. It's like
show, actually. I actually really like that.
Kind of how I was,
yeah.
So that's why I never won or anything.
There's a certain amount of luck in fantasy sports. I mean, this 5 of your first 10 picks go down for the season, it's going to be really tough on you.
Oh, absolutely.
But with that aside, you just never want to get outworked. You don't want to lose because somebody read something that you didn't read.
That's true. I like that.
Absolutely.
So before you get to the actual teams you construct, you guys, obviously you have to draft your team, and there's two aspects for fantasy. There's the snake draft, which is the only kind I've ever personally done, and then there's an auction. Have you guys done both? Are you a fan of one or the other?
Primarily, I've only done snake drafts. I tried doing an auction draft once, and not that it confused me, it just seemed a little bit more complicated than necessary for the group of people that I was doing it with. So snake draft was definitely the way to go. And I've had my fair share of luck with the snake draft. I've also had my fair share of downside with it, but snake draft seems like a fairly easy and nice option.
What about you, Dad?
Well, I'm going to tell you that I actually like the auction draft better. With the also the part that I've never actually done one live. I've done a bunch of mocks because I just wanted to see what it was like to do one. But I guess like James, a lot of the people I play with are more familiar with the snake draft. They want to stay with the snake draft, so I really just haven't gotten to a group that wants to do an auction draft. But I like the fact that, this time last Friday we went to Buffalo Wild Wings and we did our pull the balls for our draft picks, and I'm picking 8. So I have no chance to get a Todd Gurley, a Zeke Elliott. Whereas in an auction draft, you can spend whatever you want to spend out of your budget to get whoever you want to get. So I like that.
Because you have your chance to get any player you want if you're willing to spend it.
Exactly.
You just might end up overpaying, but...
So would you guys say snake is probably the norm around the board?
Snake is probably the most common for sure. I would say most people, kind of like Nick was saying, is most people probably prefer it and are more used to it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It's, at least in the crowds that I hang with, it's way preferred over auction.
Right. Have you ever suggested the auction at least?
I brought it up and you could tell, you get the eyes rolling and stuff right off the bat. We're not going here.
They might seem like they're entertaining it, but you really know that they're just not even remotely interested.
Right. They didn't like it enough to even try to claim that I'm entertaining it.
So then my next question would be, how many teams do each of you run in a league? Or not in a league, I should say. How many teams do you run each season of fantasy football? Obviously, you only have one per league, but how many teams do you normally run with, Dad?
I'm usually between 1 and 5.
Five teams?
But over the last couple years, I've been going down on that. Like this year, I'm only going to run 1. And I kind of wanted it that way this year. Again, we talked earlier about the amount of work you got to put into these. And I have my main league, and I'm going to put the time in to work those players in that league. And then whatever other leagues I have, they're just going to have to divvy up what time's left between them equally. So I've always found that the more leagues I get in, the worse I do in the other.
The worse you do.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair statement for sure. I usually do 1 or 2. I've done, I think the most I've ever done is probably 4 at once, and it just gets a little too much at that point. Like Nick was saying, you got to put a lot of time into these leagues, especially if you want to do well, and I feel like when you start to do more leagues, you definitely see a decrease in how well you perform in those leagues. When I do 1 to 2 leagues, usually one will be like more of a money league where I have some money on the line maybe, and the other league's more of a friend league or a family league, which I don't care as much about, so I can put more of my time into that money league and usually end up doing fairly well. Won a few myself, and I feel like I usually can place in the top 3 as long as I don't have those unfortunate injuries.
So then, both of you kind of saying this year you're each going to do 1. You said that, Dad. James, you kind of said that. But you each have had multiple teams in the past. Did that subtract from the joy of it throughout this, like, when you would have 5 teams? Because, there had to be the scenario where, give me a big name. Antonio Brown, let's say you had him, Dad. He scores, it helps you. He scores in 3 other leagues, it hurts you. Did that take away from the joy of fantasy football when you were running 5 teams?
Well, again, as I said before, I have my one main league. So, what do you do in my one main league? That's all that really matters to me when it gets right down to it. So if he scored for me in my main league, I don't care if he scored against me in whatever other leagues I'm in. But if he scored against me in my main league, I'm not happy that he scored for me in my other 4 leagues.
Right. I'd have to agree with that. I mean, it definitely can, depending on how important your leagues are, especially if you're doing more than one, it can affect how you view things. I mean, I've definitely had the situation where I've done 2 leagues, both of which I put a lot of effort into, and you have those players where it helps you on one league and it hurts you on the other league, and it's definitely tough to manage, but at the same time, you have to deal with that risk and with that situation.
Because yeah, when I did play, I never had like the main league like my dad's talking about, and I would just find myself caring equally how little it was or whatever about all the teams I was with, and I definitely found myself getting irritated in those moments where you didn't know if you want them to score or not. But do you guys do any of you run a league, or are you just part of one? I'll start with you, James.
I mean, I've run a league once. I wouldn't say that it went bad by any means. It changes a little bit your perspective of leagues. You kind of see what goes more into the whole league as a whole. I mean, obviously there's not a whole lot you have to do, but I mean, you're, managing a 10-person league or an 8-person league or a 12-person league, however many it is, and there's different trades and various things that are going on and throughout the message boards, and there's more to it. It definitely shifted my focus a little bit. I think I put less focus on my own team and more focus on what the league was doing. So that kind of hurt me. But I guess it really just depends on how you can manage that time and what you all have to put into the league.
And then, do you manage a league or you run a league? You run a league, right, Dad?
Yeah, the main league I keep talking about is the one that I run. Now, when I say I run it, it's been in place now for this is going to be the 9th year. The rules, have been in place so long, they're very static. Almost nothing ever changes. We even, like I said, we set the draft order last Friday. Well, we set the draft order the second Friday of every August at 6 o'clock. We draft the 4th Friday of every August at 6 o'clock. So, I mean, we don't go this, I can't draft this day, I can't draft that day. Those are when we do those things. So I have it set up to where, and we don't do in leagues in the year fees, all in the beginning. So there's no money to go collecting from people during the year. So I run this league, but it is so self-sufficient that it really doesn't put anything else on me, throughout the year. A couple of emails remind people, yep, this is coming up, we're doing this.
You never have to deal with like the Bob is trading with Sally and so thinks it's unfair and they want you to get involved or anything like that?
We have a veto process. It's out there. If somebody makes a trade that you don't like, you veto it. And if you get enough people to agree with you, the trade will be vetoed. If you don't, then you won't. I've never commissioner veto anything.
So then you wouldn't say... What was that?
I've actually never voted to veto anybody's trade because I try to let people run the team. And if I'm going to veto your trade, it's going to be because I believe that you and somebody else are actually doing something behind the scenes. But if it's just a trade that I believe you really want to do, then I'm probably going to let you do it.
Right. I feel like with trades, that's one thing too is, I mean, more often than not, the trades that people are trying to do are usually beneficial for both teams. I mean, it's a rare occurrence where you'll see like a 4-for-1 trade, which makes you think a little bit like, is it really worth it? But who knows? Maybe to the person on the other team that's getting the 1 player and giving up the 4, that trade is worth it to them. But it really just depends. I think that's really a cool way that you guys do it, how you guys make sure that everything's like set up and planned out. I think that it probably helps a lot, which you kind of said makes your league a little bit self-sufficient. It runs itself in a sense, which is nice. Like you said, you don't have to put the time and the effort into it, which I definitely would enjoy running a league then if you didn't have to put the effort in for sure.
So then, like next year's fantasy draft for you guys, everything's the same. Second Friday in August, fourth Friday in August, every year.
That's true.
Yeah,
And
that's nice.
and last year I was in Afghanistan. I drafted at 2:30 in the morning. So I'm not exempt from this either. No matter what your schedule is, you know well in advance when these things are going to happen. So plan accordingly.
You still got to get somebody each year trying to change it, though, right?
It gets mentioned every year, but the number of mentions have went down as it's not going to change because I tell them, I change it 5 minutes for you, then that means I change something, which means I can change things, which means I'm now open to change everything.
Right.
I just won't lie.
Give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Exactly. And I think with you guys doing that league for 9 years now, I'm sure you've had some turnover in the league, but I'm sure a decent amount of the people in that league have probably been a part of the league for a while now, so they know what to expect, which probably helps a lot.
Yeah, it's a in my area anyway, publicized, well-liked league. I've had a waiting list for this league for 5 years plus now.
Oh wow!
So
it's how big's the league again?
What's that?
Did you say how big the league was?
How many teams?
No, it's 14 teams.
14 teams.
That's definitely a bigger league for sure already.
And you've been running for like 9 years. Do you think 7 of the teams are the original?
Yes.
Jeez.
I would say 10.
10.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's actually really awesome.
So then,
what
was
that? One of the originals who dropped out last year, I mean, he did drop out in years past, but he got on the waiting list and came back last year. He was one of the originals, and then he won it last year, so that was kind of neat for him.
Took a couple years off, come back to take the gold.
You gotta love it.
So then when it comes to fantasy football, I know there's like 100 different ways to score the leagues. I know there's some like scoring systems that others like more than others, like the PPR seems to be a popular one. But one of the ones I kept seeing like the most debate on is in a PPR that tight ends should get 1.5 points per catch. Would you be for that or against that, James? Do you agree with that or not think it should be a thing?
I don't know if I'd be for that. I've never done a league that awards tight ends more than normal for like a reception or anything along those lines. So I don't know. I guess I'd have to look at the point structure, see how the rest of the scoring is set up. But I mean, I don't know. Certain tight ends are more susceptible to getting more receptions than others, so I mean it's a little tough. If you get a good tight end who you know he's going to get a lot of action and a lot of catches, then yeah, I'm sure it'd be worth it. But personally, I like to keep things more uniform. I mean, I definitely am a fan of PPR leagues, especially depending on the scheme of things, how they have everything set up. I'm not a big fan of certain things that with a PPR league, but PPR I feel like is the way to go. I definitely don't know how I would feel on the tight end scoring more points. What about you, Nick? How do you feel on that?
Well, and I had lots of conversations about PPR versus non-PPR, and like you said, I'm very much a pro PPR person. But the people who are against it always say the same thing. You know, you're going to have a guy catch a pass for 0 yards and he's going to gain a point. And that shouldn't be worth it because he didn't gain anything.
Right.
But what I tell them is that point for the catch doesn't have anything to do with how important the catch was. PPR came into play to make more people relevant in fantasy football.
Oh, absolutely.
If you take PPR away, a whole bunch of people come off your list. You can't use them anymore. They're garbage.
No, I would agree 100%.
Yeah, the 1.5 for tight ends came along because other than 5 or 6 tight ends in the league, most of them are just complete garbage. And that was the industry trying to make tight ends more relevant in the leagues. Because from an industry standpoint, they would like all positions to be completely, if they could find a scoring system to do that, that's what they would do. So that's kind of why it came into being. I'm perfectly okay with it. It's another one of those things that I've mentioned out before, and it was not taken very highly in the people I play with. So I don't foresee it ever happening in any of my leagues anytime soon. But I'm perfectly fine with the concept.
So you do agree with it to kind of even out the playing field a little bit almost?
Yeah, again, you make more people relevant in the league.
I
More
guess
people
that brings up the question for you then. Would, hypothetically speaking, I guess, since you said you haven't really done any leagues that do award more points for the tight end, but would you say that when drafting in a league with a tight end that scores you more points, would that draw you to maybe reach on a tight end or draft a tight end sooner than you normally would?
I like getting a decent tight end. I don't like waiting till the bottom of the pile and getting. I don't like taking say Gronk in round 2. I don't really draft the Kelseys and the Ertz in round 3, but the round 4 or 5 areas when I try to go ahead and get one, and I like to get like a Greg Olson or Delaney Walker. So I don't go for the best, but I don't want to be the guy that's getting 4 or 5 points a week out of the tight end either.
Right, I can agree with that. I've definitely had leagues where I've had a tight end who just does literally nothing for you, which at that point it's almost like, why do you have a tight end? But have you ever done any leagues with fraction scoring where they do like partial points for certain things?
Yes, my league does that.
Okay.
It's and the reason being because the first couple of years, I think Chris was still in the league at that point in time. We didn't do fractional. So if you got 90 yards on your receiver or your running back, you got 9 points. And
Sure.
Your guy you're playing against got 99 yards, he got 9 points.
Right.
And it just, we looked at it and said, well, this is just not right, you know? So now the 90 gets 9 points and the 99 gets 9.9 points.
Yeah, I've done leagues that are with fractional scoring, and I think, like you kind of said, it's a little rough when you get one guy that does get the 99 yards and another guy gets the 90, and you get the same amount of points. So I think it adds that extra level to the whole league itself. I think it's a good thing to have. I mean, it makes it a little bit more uniform, in my opinion.
Right, and it reduces ties tenfold.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I
You
would
have
say
to never get a tie.
yeah,
then,
rarely.
Huh? I would say you'd never get a tie with fraction.
Yeah,
that would be so unlikely. But with the new season coming up, what's something you get ready for the new season? Do you do like the mock drafts, James, or is there any specific outlets you go to gather your information?
I mean, I do a lot of leagues on ESPN. I mean, obviously, they have an app, so I do a lot of research on there. I mean, NFL.com.
Matthew Berry, right? He's a big guy on
Yeah,
there.
Matthew Berry is a big guy on there. I mean, even like Sports Center, shows like that, or even just like sometimes you can look on like Instagram and stuff that they post things all the time, like, oh, watch out for this player, or, things like that. So I mean, I definitely do a little bit of research.
The mock drafts at all?
I do a little bit of mock drafting. It's tough for me depending on the league because some leagues you'll go and you'll do a draft and it'll draft just the most unrealistic possibilities possible. And I'm not saying even a mock draft. I'm saying an actual draft. Like I did a draft one year with people who drafted. I can't even remember what it was, but there was like 4 quarterbacks taken in the first pick, and it's with the first like 6 picks, and it's like not that a quarterback isn't going to score you points, but especially in a PPR league, I mean a quarterback really isn't, in my opinion, the first pick I'm taking. I'm not saying that I would go necessarily a receiver either, unless it's maybe an Antonio Brown, maybe a Julio Jones type player. But usually I'm more of a running back type of guy. So I do the mock drafts. I just feel like the mock drafts don't tend to be realistic sometimes. You'll draft it one way and, you'll get your hopes up. Oh, maybe this player that I want is going to fall to where I'm drafting. And then you do a real draft and the player you want's taken in the first 2 picks or, it doesn't seem to be realistic for me.
What about for you, Dad?
Well, I think everything James has said about mock draft is absolutely 100% correct. My wife is in the league with us, and we've been doing a couple of mock drafts since we got our locations. And 2 nights ago we drafted, and somebody drafted the Jacksonville defense #1 overall.
Wow.
Obviously, somebody got in the league just to screw up everybody's draft, and then, of course, then he jumps right out of the league and goes somewhere else to screw up somebody else's draft.
Trolling.
You have to understand that everything that happens in a mock draft isn't what's going to happen in your draft. But I do mock draft. I do it a lot. You need to do it on the site where you're going to draft.
Yep. And make sure that it's the
You see
same.
where people are lined up.
Right, you got to make sure it's the same the same number of people, and I mean, you got to. There's a little bit that goes into it, but they're definitely worth doing, in my opinion.
Right, exactly, and it's again because you become a parent to where people are lined up on their ranking. Because I'm a firm believer that people draft what they see, and not a lot of people will jump down 30 spots to go pick somebody. They're going to pick. I'm going to scroll down a couple inches, and I'm going to pick somebody between those. Whatever's showing on my screen right now. And it influences draft ADPs a lot.
That's a very good point, actually. I feel like a lot of people they have a real high tendency to draft the top 20 available according to whatever site you're, drafting through, and that doesn't necessarily mean that those players are the top 20. I mean, there's definitely
people that, like he's saying, when you're looking at it and it's showing you the top 5 that are available or whatever, that are just going to, well, if that's the top 5, I'm just going to take that person.
Right, or the best available. They always do that. There's like the best.
Yeah, or you can break it down by positions.
Right, and they tend to just pick that player just because they're available and they think that player will have a great year or whatever the case might be.
Speaking of positions, though, like, what's the position you would value the most, Ed?
Well, that answer changes every year, but this year I think it's absolutely running back. In drafts, I'm picking 8. I have 7 running backs I love. So great being in the 8th position, right?
Right.
But I'm seeing 12 running backs going in the first round of a 14-team draft. So if you don't get your running backs early, then you're going to be left with nothing.
Jeez. Is running back something you like to go for early on,
James? I would say I usually tend to value the running back the most, especially nowadays, because more and more running backs are catching the ball out of the backfield and, becoming more of a reception threat, especially in PPR leagues. Like we were saying, is you're getting the point for the reception, and there's certain running backs that create a lot of yards after catch, which adds to their value a lot as well. But I definitely would say running backs, are probably my go-to. Receivers can be extremely helpful as well. I tend to not draft quarterbacks super high. I'm not saying that you want to sit there and wait till the last round, but I've definitely drafted quarterbacks towards the bottom and done fairly well. I remember a certain instance I drafted Jay Cutler, and he did actually fairly well. I made it to the playoffs, made it pretty far in the playoffs with him. And, I mean, you got to remember, he's going to throw you probably two interceptions, but he actually gets a fair amount of passing yards, and he'll get you some touchdowns, which got me some points. So in the league I was in, it made sense. But, I would say primarily running back is the way to go. But what Nick said with it changing year to year is a completely accurate statement. It really just depends. But I think right now, where we're at in the NFL and this year, running back is definitely the way to go.
And just jumping back for a quick second, are you even able to do a 14-team mock draft, Ed?
Yeah.
Oh, they did
set. This is the first year you can do one on ESPN.
Okay.
You can actually do a 20-team mock draft on ESPN.
Oh, wow.
This year.
Jeez. Well, I'm glad that finally. I know for a while it wasn't a thing for you.
Yeah, it was a max like 12 you could do. Yeah.
So
it was frustrating for many, many years of doing 12-team mock draft to get ready for a 14-team draft.
Right. So then also, like, going back to what James had mentioned earlier, he said he had kind of just rolled with a Jay Cutler for a year. How do you feel about the QB? Is that the end-all, be-all of the team? Is that something you wait on? Do you go middle of the draft? Or how do you personally feel about the QB?
Well, I normally wait on QB. It's a very deep position. Of course, you would still like to have the better of the bunch if you can get it, but the best quarterbacks are going in the third round, I prefer to go ahead and get me a wide receiver, running back at that position, where the difference between position 4 and position 10 on the depth chart of the whole league is a lot greater than quarterback from position 1 to 10. I mean, quarterbacks score the most points in almost every fantasy league, but all of them score the most points. We went and looked at our scoring from last year for the top 20, and 17 people were quarterbacks of the top 20. Only Todd Gurley, Kamara, and Antonio Brown broke the top 20 in our league. All the rest were quarterbacks. Alex Smith was 5th in the entire league in scoring. And, I mean, Alex Smith was a 12th round draft pick.
I was just going to say, a lot of people don't look at Alex Smith as a top-tier quarterback, but he clearly put up points last season.
So just get the other talent and then get a middle-of-the-road quarterback, which will still score you roughly the same average-wise of the others.
Right. You're going to beat their running back or wide receiver by 7 points a week, and his quarterback's going to beat you by 4 points a week. So you still went out. Now, in industry drafts, the so-called experts, they wait forever on quarterbacks. I mean, you see Aaron Rodgers going in the 6th round in those drafts. In family-type drafts, it's normally not that way at all. And sometimes I do find myself waiting too long on quarterbacks because I listen too much to the industry. And the next thing you know, I'm in the 8th round, and I'm not always happy with Jay Cutler.
Right.
Who is? Right. I wasn't gonna say. I wouldn't say that I was happy with the Jay Cutler, but that's one of those situations where I definitely waited too long and ended up with a Jay Cutler. Obviously, it worked out a little bit okay for me, but that's definitely not a normal situation. Would you ever say there's a situation where you would reach on a quarterback? Like if there's an Aaron Rodgers sitting there in the 4th round, are you going to reach on that, or are you just going to let that go and draft a different position?
No, if I can buy somebody what I think is a steal, I'm going to do that every time. And if I have a chance to get Aaron Rodgers in round 4, I'm going to take Aaron Rodgers in round 4.
Yeah, I would agree.
I
would say the same thing. I was just curious as to what you'd say.
Do you guys put any real value on kicker, defense, and backup QB? Do you even run with a backup QB, Dad?
Well, okay, first we'll go with backup QB. Backup QB depends on who's my first QB. If my first QB is Aaron Rodgers, I'm probably not going to draft a backup QB because I'm never going to want to start him except for the one bye week, unless, of course, something happens to Aaron Rodgers. But can't really, say that's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And kicker and defense, I'm going to say I actually do put some stock into those positions. And our draft is a 14-round draft. And in our mocks, I'm taking my defense in round 11, which to me is early. If it's not the last 2 picks in the round, to me it's early. And I'm taking my kicker in round 13. So I would say that's putting some stock into those positions.
I'd have to agree with you on that.
Also that in the leagues I play in, there's going to be people who are going to take their defense and kicker in rounds 7, 8, and 9. So now, in round 11, in the real draft I'm going to do, I like drafting Minnesota defense in round 11. But I'm not drafting the Kansas City defense in round 11. But that's what I'm going to be left with in round 11 when we actually do our draft. So I'm probably still going to end up taking a defensive kicker with my last 2 picks.
I'd have to agree with that. I mean, I definitely don't put much value on the defense and on the kicker. Well, at least kicker for sure, because I feel like majority of kickers are going to get you similar amount of points throughout the league. I mean, there are obviously some kickers that are more likely to hit a lot more field goal opportunities versus like just extra points and stuff like that. But as far as defense goes, I mean, I guess I kind of put some weight on it. You don't want to end up with the worst defense in the league that's going to get you absolutely no points week in and week out. But you definitely don't want to reach on a defense, in my opinion. just to get like the number one projected defense. I'm not saying that can't work out for you, but in most
projections
leagues,
are projections.
right? Projections are projections, and in most leagues, depending on the scoring, sometimes the defense can only get you, a certain amount of. I shouldn't say a cap on points, but just they're only going to earn you a certain amount of points. You know what I mean? But there's definitely some value within the defense. Depending on how the league you're in is scored, for sure.
I get that.
I agree completely. And on defenses, I think there's only like between 10 and 20% that the number one defense projected becomes the number one defense. It doesn't really happen that often.
I could easily see that.
Yeah, I would.
Having touchdowns to the defense score, and that's so hard to predict.
You can't project if a defense will score at all. I mean,
right.
A lot of special teams as well.
A lot of that is, I feel like, in my opinion, luck for sure. I mean,
you jump in front of a ball and you intercept it, and no one's in front of you off a quick slant or something like that.
Right, exactly. And I feel like with a defense, I don't know. There's a lot to it. I mean, certainly injuries play a lot into it. Like I know Minnesota's defense was pretty good last year. They had very little injuries, if any at all, on the defensive side, which leads to you being a pretty good defense when your entire defense is intact the whole season. And I would say that that's probably not very likely to happen year in and year out.
So I'm just going to assume both of you like defenses too, opposed to drafting a defensive player, right? And neither of you do that? Because there are some leagues where you do that, right?
There's some leagues where you draft like a specific player. Yeah. I've never done a league that isn't just a defense that you draft for a specific
I think
team.
Personally that'd be the only way to go.
Yeah, I agree. I've listened to a lot of talk about IDP leagues and how we should go to them, and I don't know that their logic is incorrect because it would probably be more easy to predict what a player is going to do than what an overall defense is going to do. But I just haven't had the desire to delve into the other 300 players on the other side of the ball that now I have to figure out what they're doing.
Right.
No, I agree 100%.
It's definitely going to double your time.
Right, definitely.
But I guess my final question here would be I think a lot of the studs are kind of known for this year, or people are talking about it. Any sleepers you guys are sitting on or anything like that? What about you, Dad? Anybody specific you're sitting on?
My number one sleeper for this year is Mike Williams from the Chargers.
Wide receiver? Is that wide receiver?
Yeah. And he's a 6'4" wide receiver. He would be still secondary to Keenan Allen, but I believe that he's going to get a big bulk of that Hunter Henry stuff that goes away. Now, if they actually bring back another pass-catching tight end, I mean, they've been talking about bringing Antonio Gates. I think he's like 55 now. But especially if they don't bring back anybody else, I really like Mike Williams from the Chargers, round 10 plus pick.
I think he's a real good sleeper, actually. I'd have to agree with that. I think he's going to be a huge threat in the red zone, at least for that team. I think he could see a lot of touchdowns, to be honest with you.
What's your sleeper then, James?
I guess my sleeper he's a Packer, Geronimo Allison. I think he's going to probably end up being the third receiver on the team. I think, obviously, we have, Adams and Cobb, and I think they're going to obviously see their action. But I think Allison, he's a pretty good receiver. And
he's
I think
tall, right?
He's pretty tall. I think he has the opportunity to fare pretty well if Jimmy Graham doesn't get all the touches in the end zone. So
he's getting them all.
We'll see. But there's a fair amount of people that could be sleepers. It's all about who you find, and I'm sure the ones that are projected to be sleepers before the season starts will change to the ones that are during the season, and we'll find a bunch of players that end up doing really well that no one expected. So I guess we'll see with that.
Well then, yeah.
Whoever the number 3 wide receiver is on that team, on an Aaron Rodgers team, is going to be valuable. There's no question about that. Just can he lock down that 3 spot?
Right. Absolutely.
Is he supposed to be?
I'm hearing that he's probably going to be. We'll see. I don't know if they've announced it 100% yet or not, but
they play on Thursday, so we'll see. But all right, that kind of wraps up my questions for basic fantasy stuff. I definitely think we're all going to get back together kind of after you guys draft your teams, kind of see how things are looking, kind of maybe even do a week-to-week thing, see how everything's looking overall, and if there's players you see throughout the year as it goes on, if there's players you like or ones people were supposed to like that you end up not liking and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I'm definitely interested in doing this as a week-to-week thing, and I think we have a lot of added insight that we can throw in there, especially once we get some teams drafted for sure.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to get you back on, Dad, after you draft that team.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of this.
Sounds good, and I appreciate the invite.
All right, guys, so I want to thank you all for listening to another episode of Uniquely Average. I'm Chris.
I'm James.